Hello everyone. In today's video I wanted to go over a couple of bed adhesion issues that I've come across with the Ender 3 V2. Now what we have here is the stock bed. So this is a piece of glass. One side has a textured surface on it and the other side is just the plain glass. Now I print with PETG. And it's a challenging material in the sense that there's not a lot of surfaces that it likes to stick to. Glass is one of those surfaces. The only way to get it to work with glass is to load up the glass with a bunch of stick glue or tape to get that PETG to stick to that surface. But I don't like doing that. It's a lot of extra hassle. And I came across a couple of interesting videos on YouTube. A couple of guys mentioned a material called Garolite. Also, it goes by the name G-10. And this material is very intriguing to me. And I wanted to try and see if I could make a bed surface that would work with PETG. Let's jump on to Onshape real quick. So I'm just going to sign in here and create a quick template. I'm going to blow through this pretty fast, guys. If you guys want more in-depth Onshape tutorials, just let me know in the comments. So all I'm doing here is just sketching out the outside shape. This is based off the measurements of the bed. Next up is to make the little tabs that are going to stick out in the front and the back. The next thing I'm going to do is give it some depth, 2 millimeters. And in the final shape, I wound up making it 6 millimeters. So it was 6 millimeter overall depth. But in this test piece, as I was trying to get the gauge the size and make sure that it was correct, I didn't want to waste a bunch of material, so I just used 2 millimeters here. Final edge radius was 3 millimeter. And that matches the radius of the stock build plate. Whenever possible, I try to avoid the 90 degrees corners because the radius adds a lot of strength. So one last thing here was to hollow out the center so I'm not wasting a bunch of material. So all I did was copy the original shape, resize it, and then extrude it through the first shape, and then use the boolean feature to remove the inside part where they overlapped. Now, Onshape is a powerful tool. If you guys haven't played around with it, I encourage you to do so. There's a lot of things you can do, even as a novice. I'm just loading it up into Cura. I changed my printer to the CR10S Pro V2. It has a bigger bed. And I had to move it over to the left. For some reason, my bed on the right side is heating unevenly or something. And I'm having some problems with that. So I can't make full use of the entire size, but it was good enough for this. And it printed out without any problem after I had shifted over to the left. So this is essentially the same size as the stock bed. It's 235 millimeters by 235 millimeters. Radius on the edges is 3 millimeters. And then what I added extra is these little tabs that come out. And the reason I did that, I'll show you here in a second, is the Garolite, you can get it in different thicknesses. The piece that I purchased was 12 by 12 inches, and it's 1/16 of an inch thick. So here it is here, and I'm sorry this is going to be hard to film because this thing is black, but it's a 1/16 of an inch thick. And what's good about it is, guess what? It has some flex. So this will double up as a flexible build plate. And it's also extremely flat. So when it's not being flexed, it's perfectly flat. The way they machine these things makes them very true. They're not warped. They're completely flat. And I think the reason they use this is for printed circuit boards, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, cutting this material is a little bit of a challenge because it is a fiberglass. So standard blades will dull on you very quickly. I've tried cutting fiberglass in the past using a utility knife with a little pressure each pass because it dulls the blade extremely quick. So what they have for these materials as far as cutting them goes, you can either get something that is diamond particles on it or tungsten carbide. Those are two materials that will cut. Garolite, and that's what I'm going to use today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a makeshift router table. I'm going to double stick tape this template to this Garolite. I'm going to rough cut it using a jigsaw. And then I'm going to go back, finish it using a flush trim bit that has diamond particles in it. The tools were expensive. I wanted to make sure that I got nice clean cuts on this. You probably could cut this with a hacksaw possibly. I haven't tried that. However, it will dull your blade relatively quick. Anyway, guys, if you like the content I'm putting out, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Turn on your notification bell. Leave me some comments. Share this video. And if you find this information beneficial, give it a thumbs up. What I'm going to do here is just mark off the Garolite where I'm going to rough cut with the jigsaw. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this down. All I'm using here is just some green double stick tape. And you don't need a lot of it, just a little. So I'm just going to cut a couple little squares. Just and I'm gonna try to leave these flat sides. I'm not gonna mess with these. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna scribe along here. And to do that, since I don't want to scratch right up against the trim, I'm going to use this little bearing. So I got this little bearing. I'm going to use my little pick tool, and I'm going to ride it along the bearing to give me a scratch just outside of the edge of this template. Alright guys, so here's the blade that we're going to use for the jigsaw. So this is a T-shank blade. And it's the one that has the tungsten carbide. See that? And I'll put links in the description to all these things that I'm using. Alright guys, make sure you wear PPE for this. The fiberglass, you don't want fiberglass dust in your lungs. Those fibers cause all kinds of problems. What I'm going to use for PPE is a high quality respirator, similar to the one that you would use if you're going to paint. So that's what I'm going to put on my face. I'm also going to protect my my hands, my sleeves. I got long pants on. I'll also be wearing safety glasses and a face shield. So make sure that you guys are being careful when you're dealing with stuff like this. Okay, on this, so this is going to be the trim step. This is what we're going to use. So this is a diamond flush cut bit. So this should make short work of trimming that fiberglass. All right, guys, let me load this thing up in the router and we'll cut it. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to separate it from the template, and then, so I got to touch up a little area here. Anyway, I'm going to separate it from the template and then just touch it up with a little 400 grit wet sandpaper. For this part of the video, I wanted to give the build plate a little bit of a decorative look. So I jumped onto the website here, found a couple of Creality logos. And what I try to look for is the ones that have the biggest size. So those are going to have the best resolution. Then what I'm looking for here is an Ender logo. I did have to modify the dragon a bit to get rid of those little whiskers because I knew the top whiskers were not going to, that smoke coming out of the nose, I knew that wasn't going to be able to be cut by the Cricut Maker. Next thing here is we're going to load up Cricut Design Space. Import our images. Select it as a cut, because that's what we want to do. And what I'm doing here when I click on this gray part is removing the background. And what I found on this part is that I was going to have to separate this dragon a different kind of way, so I had to use a different program to do that. But in the end, I was able to separate the two parts. That way, I could fit them onto the build plate and still be able to print them. So I resized my build plate image. That way, when I print these vinyl cutouts, they're going to fit on my actual build plate. So here I'm using, I had to redo the Ender logo, and I couldn't find the font. Easy way using Cricut Design Space, so I'm using PowerPoint here just to quickly flip through the different fonts until I found the closest one. That one worked good, but for some reason on Cricut Design Space, I didn't have the option, even though I could select that font, to make it italics. So I wound up having to copy this Ender font and then paste it into GIMP to get it into Cricut Design Space. Kind of a lengthy process, but I think it was worth the time. So now the next part now is to separate the dragon from the rest of the Ender logo. So again, I had to go back to GIMP for that. And now, like I said, I'm removing the little smoke coming out of the nose because there's no way the Cricut maker is going to be able to cut that out of vinyl. It's too small. And there's no real science to this. It's just an eyeball test. It's whatever looks good to you. And once I get everything all lined up and spaced properly, I'm going to attach the parts that come together. For example, the Ender and the Dragon. Those got to be attached as one image. And then the Creality logo will be a second image. Alright, so now we're ready to print. I'm arranging them here on the mat and then finally loading them into the machine. Now when you're dealing with heat transfer vinyl, you have to set whatever you're going to print into a mirror because it's going to print in reverse unless you do so. And I'm just weeding out all the extra material from here. And you got to take your time when you do this so you don't lift the letters that you're trying to keep. Now I'm just going to arrange them on my new Garolite build plate. Make sure they're spaced and centered properly. And this one needs a little adjustment there, alright. And then I just press it down. And then what I'm going to use is a easy press. So this is a Cricut tool. It's essentially a giant iron with a timer on it. So I found it 300 degrees, works well. 15 seconds per letter set. And I have a piece of parchment paper between the iron and the build plate. Once the time on the second set of letters was up, all I did was remove the parchment paper and then fold over the towel to press down and add some pressure and feel the temperature of the build plate. And when I felt that the temperature dropped down enough, then I can remove the transfer paper from the top of the heat transfer vinyl. And this build plate is never going to reach over 300 degrees anyway, so I'm not worried about that heat transfer vinyl ever coming off. It's cooled down enough. So you'll know when you've done it right when you start to peel back the transfer tape and it just comes off real easy, that means the heat transfer vinyl has adhered to the surface that you're trying to put it on. So there you go. I think it looks real good. So now we're just going to test it. And what I'll do is I'll put the old build plate back on and we'll do a test print with the old build plate so you guys can see the trouble I was having trying to print PETG to a glass bed. Now in this part I'm just running through these different shapes that I made. So they got a 6mm diameter round base that attaches to the build plate, and they're 20mm in height, and then I got varying widths. First up is going to be the glass bed tests. So I'm going to run through all the shapes until they fail 3 times, and then that's as far as they can go. So I cleaned all the bed with alcohol prior to printing, and if I ran into any problems with the prints, I would re-clean the bed. This is the 15mm piece on the glass bed. The first one was a fail. And then the second one finally has succeeded in producing this shape. Next up is the 20mm. So this one produced it without any problem. Next is the 25mm. So this one failed on the first attempt. Here we go, round 2. And here finally round 3. So if it successfully prints the round 3, then it will move on to the next shape. But if it fails here, this is where I stop. Alright, so now we're on the Garolite bed. First print, 15mm. No problem. Second one, 20mm. $25mm. And now the 30mm. First test was a fail. And the second test was also a fail. And finally on the third test, it was successful. I'm running auto bed leveling on all of these prints, so it could have been an auto bed level issue. But it did it on the third one. So this one's the 35mm. And it printed this one without any problem. And then finally the 40mm, which to me was, I was amazed. I didn't think it was going to be able to print the 40mm, but it did. I'm super impressed with the grip strength of the Garolite. And one big advantage to it is that it grips like crazy while it's hot, and then once it temperature cools down, it will release the part, which is more convenient than having to pry and bang at the part to get it off the build plate. Here we have the results of the test. So on the left, we got the stock build plate that came with the Ender 3 V2, and the first print ran into problems. The 15mm wide test piece failed on the first try, was successful on the second one, followed up by the 20mm test piece. That one printed okay, and then we started running into problems with the 25mm test piece. Failure the first time, failure the second time, and finally the third failure. Over on the right, we got the Garolite DIY build plate. It had a successful first print of the 15mm piece, the 20mm, the 25mm, and then on the 30mm, it failed on the first print, failed on the second print, and finally on the third print, it was a successful print. Then it successfully printed the 35mm, and finally the 40mm. And the only contact point that it had was this little 6mm diameter circle. So that's it. That was what was holding it on the build plate while the print head was moving along this top edge. To me, it's very impressive that it was able to handle load like that. So for me, the Garolite is the winner hands down. Guys, if you like the videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Turn on your notification bell. Leave me some comments. Share this video. Until next time, God bless.